So welcome everybody to today's session on efficiencies with UiPath and CyberArk technologies. Today we have from UiPath, myself, I'm Diana Gray. I'm the Senior Community Marketing Manager for UiPath. And we have Paulo Perez, who's a sales engineer. Josh isn't able to make it today. And then we also have from CyberArk, Brian Carpenter, who's a Senior Director of Business, and Stuart McGinty, who's a sales manager. So for today's meeting, if you guys can just please put any questions that you have in the chat box. Again, I am recording this session, so if you can please keep yourself on mute unless the speaker asks for questions to be any questions that are in the chat. Please put your questions in the chat. And then we also just want to encourage you to put any other topics that you'd like to hear from this group in the chat as well. So again, I'll be adding the URL where you can find the recording tomorrow. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Stuart.
Hey all, thank you very much for your time today. First and foremost, just want to share with you, you're spending your time with us, so we really appreciate it. Hopefully this will be everything you expect and more. We see tremendous value in UiPath and CyberArk. Why? Because UiPath, robotic process automation, is automating tasks, increasing your efficiencies. CyberArk is a security-first vendor that has been around for 25 some odd years. We're publicly traded, but as organizations try and optimize, streamline their business, they want to do it securely. So make a long story short, this is a great relationship that exists for many years. And make a long story short, as you go forward, so robotic process automation over the past couple of years, 40% increase. Many organizations are using it for a variety of different things. Hopefully we cover everything in the agenda here, if not more. Do ask questions. We like it to be interactive. Sometimes it can't be as interactive as possible, but I encourage you to reach out to us, either the CyberArk team and or the UiPath team, if you have any questions. Our ultimate goal is to help you not only streamline things, but keep it as secure as possible. So hopefully we'll cover everything in the agenda. I'm gonna ask Diana if she can go to the next slide and we'll kind of run through the next slide. So this is kind of the core concerns, right? So robotic process automation, if you think about it, they're repeating tasks time and time again. AI is used because they do have depth of information. My point is, robotic process automation touches human resource things. It may touch payroll. It may touch financial information. To do that, the robot needs privileged access to do it. When you have privileged access, that sometimes, if you're not managing it, if we talk at this first line item, and our ultimate goal is to give you information, and you'll get these slides after, that you can go back and share with your team and say, hey, you know what? UiPath and CyberArk, they kind of understand what they're doing. They've been doing it. This is what they say, but if they're unprotected and a bad actor gets it, they get access to the human resource records, the payroll records, things of that nature. The ultimate goal is get automated, have it done securely, and then keep the bad actors so that you don't make it literally, on the front page for a bad, for a bad headline. Let me put it that way. So these are the line items. I can go through them one by one, but I don't think you need to because I think you do know them. But once a bad actor gets credentials, they can do exactly what the robot's doing. Whether it's financial data, whether it's intellectual property, whether it's payroll stuff, the goal is keep them as secure as possible. That's what CyberArk does. UiPath does the automation part and the AI part. Can we go to the next slide if you can for a second? So CyberArk, we are security first. That is the way we approach everything. We have been around for 20 some odd years, publicly traded. I mentioned that. Our ultimate goal is we call privileged access for non-human or machine identities secrets. Call and ask questions, but my point is, if we look at the top left a picture, we see an iceberg. We have found in organizations, for every human access, there are 45 apps, tools, workload, service accounts. What does that mean? Well, let's point to UiPath. You may have, how many robots will you have in your environment? You may have 700, you may have 2, you may have 3. We have found a ratio that is 1 to 45 at least. What does that mean to you? If you can go back to that other slide, what does that mean to you and team going forward? There we go. So what that actually means is your attack surface is primarily controlled by machines and non-human, you call them service counts, workloads, or apps. How do you keep it secure? CyberArk, security first, been around for many years, and we've been doing this for 20 some odd years. So as you go forward, try and automate with UiPath and robots, and you want to do it securely, we hope that you will consider us and choose us as your way to go forward. We, CyberArk, can handle 99% of what is in your environment. What did Stuart just say? Whether you're in a cloud, whether you're in a hybrid cloud, whether you're in a data center, we can help you. Everybody's embracing new services, things of that nature. So if you look up at the iceberg, you see Kubernetes. We can handle containers. We can handle RPA, which is UiPath. We can handle CI/CD pipelines. So when you're building out technologies, we can handle scripts. We can handle container, which is Kubernetes. We can handle vulnerability scanners. We can handle homegrown apps. 99% of what is in your environment, we can handle it. So as you go forward and you're looking to partner with somebody, as I said earlier, hopefully you can make the choice. Our ultimate goal is to keep you out of the red zone, right? So you see SolarWinds down there. SolarWinds was a CI/CD, basically, attack. They put malicious code into something that was an automatic update, and it went out to everybody. We can help keep your CI/CD more secure. And Uber, quite frankly, was a social engineering attack where they looked at a particular person, but it was actually a hard-coded script that allowed a bad actor to diverse environments. My point is, your environment is very diverse. We have been around for many years. We have a variety of solution sets that can help you keep you secure. We have to know what the technology is, where it resides, and what your priorities are. So our ultimate goal is, I'm going to read through this, it keeps security and development on the same page and do not impact anybody's ability going forward. Do it as quickly as we can, keep ahead of development, have them add a couple lines of code to whatever they're doing, but the whole shift left technology, which is get your development team or get security as part of the next thing. The last thing on this slide is the SEC ruling on the bottom. The SEC ruling on this is if there is a security incident, it needs to be reported on your annual reporting. What does that mean to you? It means that the C-level is now aware of it and may become available. I mean, they may become liable. I apologize. If it's on their yearly report, they're aware and they will probably be liable. So how do you keep your attack surface more secure? Think of CyberArk. How do you automate it? Think of UiPath. Let's buzz to the next slide if you don't mind. All right, so some of this stuff I covered, some of them I didn't. But the key is, for a secrets management journey, not sure where anybody is on this right now, but call us and we can help you. Give developers what they need at the top left. Add a couple lines of code to whatever you're doing, regardless of what the technology is. I'm talking, we can handle mainframes. We can handle, out of the box integrations. We can handle IoT and OT. Give security a centralized place to go forward, and then operations and optimization takes place because you have a best in practice and you have a single source of the truth. One of the crazy statistics that just came out was the average security team has 75 security-oriented services or pieces of software. What does that mean to you? It's overwhelming, and they only use 10. So we, from a security perspective, see this as kind of the year of consolidation and optimization. Organizations come to us and go, oh, you understand what we call privileged access management. How can you help us with the other things in our environment that aren't people? So machines, robots, it may be a vulnerability scanner. The key to our success is mostly our partner community. If you look at the bottom part of this slide, you'll see under robotic process automation in the middle there's UiPath. All of these are recognizable icons, and our partner community have out of the box, for every one of these icons, we have out of the box integrations. What does that mean to you? It means it's supported by UiPath, it's supported by CyberArk, and there is a path to make this operational within your environment. Out of the box integration to get it up and running. We break our solution set down into basic buckets. I do not want you to actually look at some of the things here, but we break it into cloud. We break it into some things that have been around for a while, what we call robotic process automation or RPA, COT, which is commercial off-the-shelf software, or ISV, which is independent software vendors. And we have out-of-the-box solutions for them. And then we also have things for vulnerability scanners, or just actually what we call static apps, things that you built yourself. If you're part of, let's say, a health insurance or even life insurance, everybody has different ways of doing things, and they may have built out technologies on a mainframe. It could be built out on WebSphere. It could be built on anything. My point is, regardless of what is in your environment, cloud-first vendors focus on cloud initiatives only. We know that most of our clients have been around for many years, and they have things on a day-to-day basis that are critical that aren't cloud-oriented. And we've been very fortunate that we've been able to help them for many years. We can also help you with IoT and OT. What does that mean to you? The majority of the IoT and OT devices, that includes cameras, printers, IP phones, have been installed. Better than 50% of them have been installed with default passwords. That is a huge risk for most organizations. Point is, give us a call and we can walk through it. Does anybody have any questions on this? I don't know, Diane, I can't monitor that, but does anybody have any questions I might be able to answer at this point? Or go to the next slide, if that makes sense.
Yeah, let me just check chat real quick.
Yeah, I don't see any questions in the chat at this point.
No.
Okay, that's cool. So these are the buckets that we put our solution sets into: things that are agent-based, things that are SaaS-based, and things that are agentless. This is a very busy slide. I apologize in advance. My key to this is, if we look over at the agent-based at the top left, and you see it says credential providers, forget that, but go down and you see Varonis, you see Verify, you see Forescout, you see Scripts. That is the solution set that we would use to solve your problems. Now, if we go over to the right to agentless, and you go down to the bottom, the central credential provider, you'll see that there's UiPath there. That is the solution set that we use for UiPath. this is just a bunch of information. The key thing is there's a central place and a central vision for all of your, it's a single source of the truth. So God forbid you have an audit or you have to go do some forensics, whether it is a person or a thing, you can find out the who, what, when, where, and why of what took place. Once again, a human or a non-human. And that's clearly what sets us apart. We have things that help organizations use their native vaults from whether it's AWS, Azure, or Google. We have other things we can help you, whether it's container-based or not container-based or something that you built yourself. The asterisk means that UiPath is a special partner for us. The next slide, if you don't mind. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. And when I get through with this slide, I'm going to pass it over to Brian, my better half. The things that clearly separate us from really the marketplace are going to be in blue on to the right. And that's all I'm going to talk about on this slide. But human and non-human on the same platform from a security first perspective. We have 200 some odd integrations with our technology. We are very, very fortunate that we are trusted by better than 50% of the Fortune 500. So with that being said, we perform at scale and we are highly flexible with our solution set. For non-human or machine identities, right? So identities, a human identity, it's something you know, something you have, or something you are. A non-human identity, we authenticate off unique attributes of a person or unique attributes of an identity, a machine identity. So for a container, we can look at like a namespace or a service account, or Azure, we can look at, a subscription, or AWS, we can look at an IAM role, or we could actually authenticate. But the key is for our non-human identities, we look at attributes that are unique and specific to that machine, and we have an identity for it. The key is when it needs privileged access, it's instantaneous. You need to have it immediately. So scaling and performing at scale is very, very important. This morning when I signed on, I mistyped a couple things and it took me a couple minutes to get in. A machine needs to get access immediately or else you get a lot of people excited. So the CyberArk / UiPath partnership has worked out well really for us. We hope going forward that you reach out to us and we can help you keep your environment as secure as possible. I'm going to pass it over to you, Brian. I think that's the last slide I have.
All right, great. Thanks, Stu. And thank you all again for joining. I know Stu thanked you at the beginning. We really appreciate you taking time out of your valuable day to hear our presentation today. And hopefully this will help you as you're thinking about how an integration between CyberArk and UiPath may benefit your organization. And when I think about value add of integrations in CyberArk, we have hundreds of integrations with our partners. We have over 260 different partners. And when I think of the integrations that really provide value, they check off multiple boxes. And the boxes I'm thinking of are around security, which Stu has done a great job of summarizing some of the things that were covered in the last webinar. But they also cover things like compliance, efficiency, and time to value. And I think the integration, and as I go through the next 10 to 12 slides or whatever they are, will really highlight the value that UiPath and CyberArk together and how we complement each other and how this integration really checks off all of those boxes. When you're looking at automation, you want to make sure that automation provides a lot of value, whether it's robots or AI. I think all organizations recognize the value that automation brings in helping make companies more efficient, scalable, and so on. But you need to make sure you're doing it securely. As with anything, if you're not doing it securely, you're opening up pathways for attackers within your organization. And a great way to do that is by leveraging a tool like CyberArk to manage passwords, store those credentials, and make sure that those credentials are rotated in accordance with company policy, that they're unique, which when you're talking about, as Stu mentioned, not only for human credentials, so you're thinking about root users, privileged users, those type of power credentials attackers are looking for when they gain access to an environment, but also all those credentials that are used by applications, databases, robots, things like that. And that number ratio right now is 1 on the human side to 45 on the machine side. And that number is not doing anything other than increasing. So we're going to see that number continue to increase. And it's all the traditional things that you think of, as well as some of the non-traditional. And he touched on it a little bit when you're talking about printers, cameras, phones, routers, switches, that Internet of Things, as well as OT. Those types of devices are exploding everywhere, and attackers realize that, and they understand that a lot of cases those are either default credentials, the same credentials across multiple devices, across multiple parts of the organization. So they know they get access to one. That's an easy way for them to, as a part of that attack chain lifecycle, to move laterally throughout the network, do the reconnaissance to find what they need then to do, disrupt the business or exfiltrate data, things like that. So we want to make sure that we have a place where we can centralize and manage those credentials, monitor the usage of those credentials. So we're securing them, we're monitoring who's using those, and being able to share that information with other tools like SIMs and SOARs and so on, which is important because you want to make sure, from a compliance standpoint as well, you understand the who's and what's and whys of who's using those credentials and when. And then, one of the big things we're focusing on today is really around efficiency. And by automating the management of those credentials and the rotation of those credentials, you're eliminating a huge amount of manual effort that will be needed to maintain that same level of security within your organization. If you're having to manually go out and rotate credentials on thousands of different applications or devices and rotate them in accordance with your company policy, that's a huge amount of effort. And what happens is, those credentials don't get rotated in accordance with your company policy, so now you're out of compliance. Or B, or B, those credentials are the same across multiple devices. So if an attacker gets access to one of those credentials, they know that they're able to access other things within the organization. So when we talk about moving laterally before, that's a great way for them to move laterally. So let's go on to the next slide. And here's just a real quick slide that shows you how, when you're leveraging UiPath, how you can leverage the CyberArk credential store. As Stu mentioned before, we have a central credential provider that allows UiPath to securely connect to the CyberArk Vault to retrieve credentials as needed. So it's just a matter, if you're a developer and you're going through and setting up one of these bots and you have to define how that bot is going to access a credential, it's as easy as selecting the CyberArk CCP, and that gives you that secure way to connect to the Vault to retrieve that credential. Next slide. And here's just a simple flow of how the robots request their credentials from the Vault, and they are able to retrieve those credentials and then get access to what they need. The other key component of this is, by leveraging a tool like CyberArk and having a process set up like this, you're able to give the credentials to the robots as needed and to what they need only when they need it, which obviously shrinks that attack surface as well. If an attacker, for some reason or through some method, is able to get access to that robot, they're going to be very limited in what they're going to be able to access and where they're going to be able to go with that access. So really helps to shrink that attack surface and allows your organization to really become more identity centric when it comes to securing privileged credentials. Because without a tool like CyberArk, I talked before about monitoring of credentials and who's using them and so on. Without a tool like CyberArk, you could be flying blind with regards to, if you have an admin group, for example, and they're all sharing the same admin credential. You may know that somebody used that admin credential to do something, but you don't know who did it, when, what, and so on. So with a tool like CyberArk, you're going to know who logged in, retrieved that credential, and what they used it for. So it really adds to that, the ability to become more identity centric, if you will, in your security. Next slide. In the efficiencies between UiPath and CyberArk, the CyberArk and UiPath really complement each other and provide a lot of value when it comes to the automation capabilities of UiPath. CyberArk enhances those abilities by giving UiPath that ability to securely connect to the vault and retrieve the credentials as needed. So now you don't have to manually worry about embedding those credentials within the robot, going out and manually updating those credentials when they get rotated and so on. We're automating all that process and giving that bot the ability to access that credential as needed. So huge efficiency play there. And then by automating the process of rotating that credential and providing access to it, we're giving that IT team back a lot of more value added time to be able to go out and do some of the other things that they need to do versus managing credentials and rotating those credentials. And one group that I think gets left out when we're thinking about this is the developers. And really, when you think about the developers who are creating these robots, and they need to, and developers, in a lot of cases, they may not want to have to think about security. So we're giving them a more efficient way to get access to that credential and implement security without delaying their ability to create those robots. So we're actually improving the time at which they can deploy these robots. So increasing that time to value to your organization. Next slide. And cost. I think this is probably one of the first things that most organizations think of when they think about the value add of an RPA solution. Robots, no matter the industry or whatever vertical you're in, robots do things more efficiently than humans do in most cases. Not only do they do it more quickly, they are able to work 24 hours, 7 days a week. Obviously, there's a lot of limitations on how long humans can work. Some humans can work longer than others, but no human can keep up with a robot, especially for a lot of these redundant tasks. And organizations can, as a result of that, they can take advantage of some of the early payment discounts or some process savings by implementing tools like an RPA or AI or other types of automation within their environment. Okay, next slide. The scalability and efficiency. So, what are we talking about when we talk about scalability? We're really looking at how companies can process more work without adding additional resources when it comes to humans. So with tools like RPA, we're able to give organizations more time back to their employees to do more of that value added work by eliminating a lot of those redundant tasks and having robots take advantage of doing some of these repetitive tasks that really necessarily aren't value add. And the automation that CyberArk provides in rotation of those credentials, making sure they meet complexity requirements and are unique, really adds to that efficiency side and scalability side and providing back more of that value added time to your organization to do those value added activities. Next slide. The importance of supporting automation. It's one thing to say that we're going to implement an RPA solution or any other type of automation type of exercise within your organization, but in order for it to be effective, your organization needs to support it, and it needs to, as a part of that support, it needs to have security baked in from the beginning. As you can see there, 68% of workers believe that automation will make them more productive. I can't believe that number is not higher, and I have to think as we go through the next a couple of years, that number is going to skyrocket. But as of right now, it looks like it's about 68% of workers believe that automation makes them more productive. The integrations between CyberArk and UiPath, as I mentioned before, gives organizations the ability, as they're developing these robots, to embed security within this process to ensure that robots are getting access to credentials as they need them and not before, and they are getting the credentials that they're leveraging are being rotated and are unique across these applications, so reducing that attack surface if in case one of those credentials were to be compromised. Next slide. So really, there are 5 barriers to having automation at scale. And a lot of those, or really all these, we can resolve with the integration that we have between CyberArk and UiPath. The first one is hard-coded credentials within the bots. Attackers know that those credentials are hard-coded within there. They get access to that bot. They have access to credential. And then within that, they know if a lot of organizations, if they're hard-coded within those bots, they don't rotate those credentials as frequently. Those credentials may be used across multiple bots or multiple applications, so that attack surface then expands pretty dramatically. So really, the first 3 bullets there that you see with hard-coded credentials make them more vulnerable. They're difficult to rotate, exposing critical systems to risk, and it creates a large attack surface that all revolves around having them embedded and hard-coded within that application or robot or whatever it may be, and not having a way to automate the rotation and management of those credentials. And then by having those hard-coded in there, you don't really have a way for your bot to retrieve those credentials. And then, but the attacker, they know all this. If they get access to that credential, the attack surface is pretty large. But that's just the first step in the attack chain lifecycle, right? They gain access to the environment, they see what they have access to, and then they start performing their reconnaissance. So if they're able to use that robot then to start moving laterally throughout the network and escalating until they're able to get access, that's just the first step. If that credential is unique and being managed by a tool like CyberArk, they're very limited in what they're going to access versus having the same credential across multiple locations. So that is some things we're going to talk about next, is how CyberArk and UiPath can help eliminate some of these barriers to automation at scale. So next slide. So limiting manual credential rotation. We talked about in the previous slide, hard-coded credentials and so on. This really checks off a couple of the boxes when it comes to efficiency and security. Making sure if you have a tool like CyberArk, having a tool like CyberArk gives you the ability to rotate these credentials on a regular basis. And it's crucial for bots, but creates challenges for groups responsible for rotation. CyberArk auto rotation is a better option. You don't want to manually go and rotate these credentials. We talked about some organizations have tens or hundreds of thousands of these credentials that have to be rotated, and doing that manually is a daunting task. Having something like CyberArk can automate that really provides a lot of value from an efficiency standpoint and helps with that automation. A tool like CyberArk also gives you the ability to set that policy for the frequency that credential needs to be rotated and the complexity requirements. So we're going to make sure that it meets all those compliance requirements in regards to when and the complexity of that credential. Next slide. And the benefits of having that centralized, in addition to some of the other things that we talked about, just having a secure location where you know that those credentials are located and that those credentials can be monitored, and that information can be shared with tools like SIEMs and SOARs for reporting, analytics, and so on. Consistent policy across all your bots and all your applications. So you know that it's a consistent policy across your organization. And then ease of access to those credentials. While we're making it more difficult for the attackers to get access to those credentials, we're making it easier for the organization itself to get access to a credential. So if you're having to have unique credentials across all these applications and devices, if you're doing that manually, it's a pretty daunting task to provide access to those credentials as needed to privileged users who may need to log in and do configuration changes and so on. Whereas if you have a vault, you're able to log into that vault and easily see the credentials that you have access to and retrieve those on an as needed basis. And that really helps increase operational efficiencies, not only for accessing those credentials, but for applications accessing those credentials as well. As I mentioned before, the development of robots and providing them with a secure way to access credentials will increase the efficiency of developing those bots and that time to value for your organizations. And having this in place really requires the entire organization to be on the same standard of security when it comes to passwords and usage of passwords and so on. Next slide. And when you think about data handling and access to data, really you want to think about applications and robots the same as you do humans. And with that, you want to make sure that they only have access to the necessary applications and databases that they need access to, that they have limited access to customer data, that they don't have access to everything within your organization, just to what they need to do their job. It's especially important when you think about bots that have access to confidential information and limiting those access of those unattended bots. Bots with elevated access across departments increases risk of when if they are compromised. So you want to make sure that you're limiting bots that have that type of access. So when you're thinking about bots and data handling, think about those in the same way that you would think about humans and limiting what they have access to. Next slide. And oversight and auditability of bots. Once again, this is the same. When you think about robots and humans, you want to make sure that you're monitoring those robots that have access to admin access. You want to make sure you're logging that activity. And a lot of times, the tools that you're using for automation may not be a security first mindset for that particular application. So those logs may have to come from other sources. And so you need to think about that as you're implementing these types of solutions. Logs are important and can provide insight into access and so on. So you want to make sure that those centralized view of audit logs are created and available and are leveraged for not only reporting, but investigative analysis as well. Next slide. So the main features of CyberArk Secrets Manager, number one, it integrates with UiPath and really creates a lot of the efficiencies we had talked about before. It secures credentials, gives a secure way of providing credentials, not only to applications, but to humans as well. It automates a credential rotation. So it really helps when you think about security, compliance, and efficiency. It ensures that these passwords are all meeting complexity requirements that are rotated in accordance with company policy and are unique. I think that is another key part here. We want to make sure that we're continuing to find ways to reduce that attack surface. So by implementing something like this, we're reducing that attack surface if one of the credentials does find a way to get compromised. And then isolation, control, monitoring, and recording of all privileged activity are all other key features that CyberArk can provide for securing credentials as well. Next slide. All right, and just a quick summarization of what we discussed today. We talked about a little bit about the efficiencies that you can realize by implementing the integration between UiPath and CyberArk, some of the barriers to automation and how our integration can help eliminate a lot of those barriers. And we're able to leverage these integrations to eliminate manual activities, the benefits of a centralized credential storage system like CyberArk, that it provides with the automation of a lot of the activities providing back more value added time to your organization. And then data handling best practices for bots and bot oversight. So with that, I've been talking for a while. I think I need to hand it over to Polo now to cover some other areas.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. Do we want to take a minute here to take questions, or do we want to have some Q&A at the end of the session?
I think
Awesome.
we had one question. Maybe we can answer that from the chat. Just a minute. Do you need an internet proxy server to go between the CyberLink on-prem server and cloud orchestrator? If so, do you have to open up the proxy server, or is there another way?
Yeah, CyberArk, would you know how to address that question?
Yeah, I'll take that and we'll get an answer back to you. I don't know off my head, but I know that we do integrate with the managed service orchestrator. So
Right. So the one thing I do know on the integration that we currently have, leveraging the central credential provider, it'll work with both on the CyberArk side with our self-hosted as well as our cloud-based solution, and then same thing on the UiPath. There is a on-prem server component to it right now, where if you are leveraging UiPath Cloud, it would have to connect to the CCP server to retrieve those credentials. So there is an on-prem component to that. We are working on a cloud-to-cloud option. If you have both Privileged Cloud on the CyberArk side, as well as the UiPath Cloud option, where we'll go 100% stay in the cloud. That hopefully will be available at some point in Q2 or Q3 of 2024. But as of right now, there is an on-prem component of that integration between CyberArk and UiPath.
Awesome. Thanks for that, guys. So real quick, by way of introduction, my name's Polo Perez. I've been at UiPath for over 2 years at this point. I spent 1 year in our customer success program and then have since transitioned into the sales engineering / pre-sales technical consultant role. And today, really, I just, to kind of add on to what the CyberArk team has covered, is just go over, what does good look like for standing up an enterprise-grade automation program? How do you go about facilitating that for your customers and encouraging the right behavior so they ultimately are successful and are seeing value from the program itself? So wanted to start with just some quick learning objectives, right? So like what I was just alluding to, we're going to look at what does good look like? How does the business perceive value? How do we generate pipeline? And what do we need to do in order to sustain a successful automation program from start to finish? So really, there are 5 critical things that you need to keep in mind when you're standing up an automation program to ensure that not only there's value in it, but also that we're achieving our goals as customers, as sales, as businesses, right? So it all needs to tie back to really what I like to call the North Star, right? What is important to the business? What are they looking to enable through the use of automation? And once we've identified where we're going, it's all about generating the right demand. So what processes, what business applications, what people do we need to involve in order to identify the right processes so that we can generate value through the use of automation? Of course, once that technology exists within your business, to really a lot of CyberArk's portion of the presentation is, what does the right governance look like? What security do we need to take into consideration? And ultimately, how are we going to execute this in a way that meets our InfoSec policies and is managed within an enterprise-grade governance way? Lastly, we need to ensure that we're keeping track of accounting, right? How are we realizing value as a business? If one of our measurements is hours saved, and we can't translate that to dollars saved or other metrics that the business might care about, then it might be difficult to, show proof of that value that the automation program is generating. And then finally, there is a change management portion of RPA, right, of automation in general. And we want to make sure that we're communicating that in the correct ways, not only to the people that will be directly impacted, but to the business as a whole. So we'll dive into each of these sections as we move through the presentation. Please feel free to ask questions. But really, to kick things off, automation is a means to an end, right? It's not a magic bullet. It's not, kind of what all of AI has been, hyped up to be up until this point in time. It is, if we want to improve our bottom line, if we want a mechanism for taking costs out of the business, how do we do so? Automation is one of those levers that you can pull on in order to accomplish just those. So again, existing business goals, strategies, what does leadership care about? What are my metrics? What are the metrics of the division, the department? And how does automation tie back to those at the end of the day, right? So making sure that your program is aligned to meet those objectives and to provide value in those same categories is immensely important for getting your automation program started off on the right foot. So for example, here in the signs of misalignment, digital transformation, while it's something that a lot of leaders talk about, it ultimately isn't a goal. It is a means to an end. Why are we transforming our business from a digital perspective? And what do we expect to get out of it? Then you have what is the driving factor of maintaining a successful automation program? And that ultimately will be pipeline, right? A lot of our customers, I think, have a good understanding of what automation is capable of, what it's not capable of. But where I see a lot of our customers tend to stumble is you have a good North Star identified. You identify use cases that facilitate achieving that outcome or that goal, but you will eventually run out of pipeline if this isn't something that you're putting a lot of thought and effort into as an automation program. So again, this is something that needs to be taken into consideration when you're starting an automation program, and something that really needs to be ongoing throughout the entire life cycle of your enterprise automation program. So where are we pulling new ideas from? Are we crowdsourcing the right ideas? How are we measuring the impact that they'll have? How do they ultimately allow us to achieve our goals? And can we educate not only the people directly involved in the program, but the entire business on how we can leverage this technology further to facilitate meeting our goals as a whole? Then you really have the design of your program internally or via various different implementation partners. So what I've seen in my experience as a customer success manager, I've seen a lot of SIs leveraged in the beginning to stand up your automation program. If it's something that you eventually want to take internally to your program, then of course those SIs are great at helping you understand what it looks like to build a successful automation program. And then, in a sense, teaching you and your internal teams how to fish. I've also seen, a lot of customers that will directly outsource this technology to different MSPs and partners as well. So if that's an option, but generally speaking, there are a lot of different ways that you can structure this. The important part is to ensure that there are clear roles, there are clear lanes, who is in charge of pipeline generating, who is in charge of, delivering on these automations. Where is this capacity coming from? Are we adding team members with previous RPA, UiPath, or automation experience? And then, of course, always coming back to that value is how are we tracking it? How much of it do we have so far? And is this in line with the goals that we've set forth at the beginning of standing up our automation program? Again, back to the value conversation, because that is what a enterprise automation program is set to do, right? Is provide value to the business, and not just value in the form of, reducing error rates or adding capacity, but value that impacts the bottom line, that aligns with our North Star goals, outcomes, and can be tracked from an accounting perspective, right? The business at the end of the day has to be able to recognize value and show that, the program is not only cost effective, but cost effective to a significant degree based on what we set out to do through the program. So, metrics that can't necessarily be tracked easily, or maybe they don't have a good process for being tracked. These are things that need to be thought out and discussed prior to pushing automation forward. Again, it can't just be, we're looking to enable digital transformation and not being tied back to something that's trackable, feasible, and makes the gains of automation real at the end of the day. And then finally, this is the change management portion of building an automation program, I think, is one that is often overlooked for a couple of different reasons. From my perspective, automation isn't necessarily in the business of, taking jobs from individual people, but to free those individuals to do more focused, value add, more complex work, right? I don't think at this day and age anybody wants to sit in front of a computer and really, copy and paste all day. Freeing those individuals to focus on, higher level revenue generating tasks is ultimately what we'd like to automation to be leveraged. But of course, all of that is a part of a change management talk track. Relieving those people of that mundane, repetitive work, I think, is something that we could articulate better to our customers, as well as, letting them know that this is, in the end of the day, we're trying to add additional capacity to the business or remove cost, not necessarily automate individuals out of a job. And then, of course, the production automation in the wild will change how some people are completing their work day to day, right? Maybe it becomes more of an exception handling exercise. Maybe there's some human in the loop phases to processes that we're looking to automate, but being able to communicate that to the team members and ensure that, and ensure that we are working in tandem with this technology to achieve our goals is crucial to standing up a successful long-term automation program. So I'll pause here. Any questions, comments, concerns? I see one question in the chat. Oh, there's just a note from Diane.
Yeah, if anybody has any questions, feel free to take yourself off mute and ask them as well. Okay, I'd like to thank you all for attending today. And Stuart, Brian, and Polo, thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate
Thank you.
everybody's time.
Have a good day,
Thanks,
everyone.
everyone.
Thanks for your time.
Uh-huh.